And Dottie, you're admitting people, right?
Yes.
Because I'm gonna kick off the meeting since it's just a little after 7:32. I want to welcome everybody to the Hyde Park Book Club. My name is Michael Soffer, and Dottie Jeffries and Carol Veith are my co-conspirators in this effort. And we meet the third Monday of the month at 7:30 via Zoom, at least since the pandemic. Hopefully we'll get back to in-person meetings at some point. At the end of the meeting, I'll go over our schedule, but right now we're gonna go into tonight's meeting. And I would ask everybody actually it's pretty quiet tonight. You all look pretty much muted. If anybody is not muted and doesn't want to speak, please mute yourself. Tonight we will be discussing the life and books of Hyde Parker Leon Despres, the legendary Fifth Ward alderman, attorney, and author. He graced us from 1908 until 2009. As an independent leader in a city dominated by a political machine, Leon was a staunch defender of civil and human rights. During the course of his long and distinguished political career, he set the standard for a positive, ethical, and effective approach to politics that is still held in esteem. He, with his wife Marion, was an architectural preservationist fighting to keep Chicago's legacy intact, especially in the aftermath of urban renewal, which was especially felt here in Hyde Park. He was also one of the founding members of the Hyde Park Historical Society. So in a sort of weird way, we welcome Leon Despres to this meeting tonight. I would like to welcome three guests to tonight's meeting who will share some of their memories and will be available for your questions. Robert Despres is Leon Despres' son and an active supporter of the Hyde Park Historical Society and former board member. Carolyn Craycraft was a close friend of both Leon and Marion for many, many years, and she worked very hard on a photo documentary of their lives, which she donated to the Historical Society some time ago. So, and then finally, Ken Hyde, in addition to co-authoring Challenging the Daily Machine with Leon and writing Chicago Afternoons with Leon, was the Chicago Tribune obituary writer for many years. He also wrote the Action Line column from the 1960s to the 1980s. He has published numerous books, including The Book of the Poor, Chicago Originals, and most recently his autobiography, He Writes About Us. Kenan will share his perspectives on working with Leon and on the two books, as well as memories and anecdotes from his association. We're hoping that he will be followed by comments from Bob and Caroline, at which point we will open the meeting to questions and your shared memories. If you wish to ask a question tonight, please use chat and be sure to indicate whom you are directing the question. If you just want to share memories, use chat to just state your name and say that you want to do that. And now I'm going to turn the conversation over to Kenan. Kenan, it's all yours.
Hi, everybody. I just want to say that it was one of the great honors in my life to be connected with not just Len, but also his family. They
Could you speak up? Speak louder.
Okay, all right. It was an honor to be connected with this family and be admitted to their home and to enjoy be inspired by them. And I mean that by not just Len and Marion, but the rest of the family, his daughter and son. And I do want to say that it was my idea to write the book, his biography. And in so doing, what is that? Okay. Anyhow, can you hear me? Say
Yes.
Yeah.
Perhaps you're on a
So-
your keyboard or something.
I'm not doing any of that. Well, wait a minute. Oops, I was. Sorry, folks, it was I. Anyhow, when we got started on it, he said, well, I don't need all those clippings. I said, oh, yes, you will. And it came up so very evidently when I asked him, well, let's write a chapter about what you did for women. He said, I can't remember anything particular I did. I said, oh, do I have the evidence? And there's a whole chapter on it, read it. But one of the things was that he had suggested to his friend, Mayor Richard Day Daley, anyhow, to Richard Day Daley, that they had never had a woman on the city council, and that when somebody died or retired off, during the thing, the mayor got a chance to appoint a person. And so Len suggested that they appoint a woman. And Richard Day Daley said, don't talk about sex at Christmas time.
Jeez.
Anyhow, another story is when I first walked into their apartment, I looked up on the wall and I said, geez, you have a picture, not a picture, but anything, picture of a woman who looks like Marion when she was younger, and it's signed Diego Rivera. I said, how did you ever get that thing? He said, it's not, it's actually a photo, it's actually a picture, it's a painting. I said, what? He said, yeah, we went down to Mexico, and that's quite a story. And they met Diego Rivera. They spent a lot of time with him down there. They were asked to carry a gun because he was being hunted, Diego Rivera was. And so while he painted the picture of Marion, there's the picture right there. While he painted that picture, he took Frida to the movie theaters. And since we were watching the movie together, we took he and his wife to see the movie Frida. He said, that's what I'll be famous for. I took Frida to the movie theater. So another story about him was that after his wife died and he had gotten older and out of the picture, he was no longer, the person that everybody called up and had on their TV shows and everything else like that. And I know all about that because I've spent 20 years no longer being famous. Anyhow, you brought me back today. Anyhow, I said, we're going to do something about it. We're going to go out and change the city, and not just write about it, but we're going to write about it, but that's the only thing we're not. And that's what this book is about, Afternoons with Leon Despres. And one quick story about it is that we went to visit Studs Terkel, and he's a mutual friend of mine and very much of Len's. They dated back to 1936 themselves. And so it was the twilight of Studs' life. He was going to be 95 very soon. And he was sitting slouched in his chair. And I said, Studs, what is it that really motivated you? He jumped out of his chair, threw his cane over his head, and he marched up and down the room, talking and talking and talking about it was, the impulse, the drive, the people that I wanted to do and reach, and I just stood there stunned, and it made a very good chapter in the book. So that's kind of my synopsis of it. Oh, I do want to read a little bit. Yes, one little thing of the introduction to the book by Mike Royko. Now, we were looking for somebody to write an introduction, and Mike was dead at the time, but he had written this column on it. And so we used the column as the introduction. I'm going to read just a small part of it. Somebody suggested that I introduce an alderman. This is Mike Royko. That suited me fine because I'm always happy to introduce an alderman anytime I can catch one and a grand jury is in session. He says, but they said I should introduce Alderman Len Despres. He had an argument because we had an argument because I didn't believe Despres really was an alderman. If he is an alderman, how come he rides around his ward on a bicycle instead of a Cadillac? But they said he's going to get a tandem and have somebody else do the pedaling. So here's another one. In 1965, Len became the first alderman during the Daley administration to have the city council sergeant at arms sick on him because he wouldn't sit down. Until that time, the mayor had never had an alderman defy him when he said sit. In fact, most of them not only sit, they bark and roll over. And finally, he's the only member of the present city council to have been shot while holding office. Others have been far more deserving of that addiction. So that made a good introduction for the book. Those are my stories, and I stick by them. So any questions out there? Anybody?
Well, I'd like to suggest, I think that Caroline might have a few words to say.
Oh, good friend of Caroline's and myself. Hi, Caroline.
Caroline, unmute yourself.
Very clever. Good idea. A picture of the Despres family with Mayor Daley on about the time Len was 100. Can you see?
Yes, very good.
Okay. And this is me with Len.
Oh,
Either
wow.
maybe 101.
Very nice.
Good, nice picture.
And this is Marion.
1937.
Oh, is it? And
1930. It hung in his office.
yes. That's where I got it from. Tom Gagan gave it to me. And I'm going to give it to the Chicago History Museum. Is that okay, Bob?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think all of Len's archives are there.
Yes.
Okay. I got to know Len and Marion very well when they lived in the same building as me in Vista Homes. I had known him a bit before that as the Hyde Park alderman, but I got to know them very well when we were neighbors in Vista Homes. And when I had to run away from my husband, who was getting a bit violent, I ran upstairs, and Len and Marion allowed me to live with them for nearly 2 years. They were my home away from home. I could not have survived without them. And Len's counsel was so marvelous. I mean, what was incredible was how totally engaged he was right to the very end. I mean, till he was 101. I mean, he was absolutely on it the whole time. Incredible, incredible man. I was so deeply privileged to have known him. And oh, one time I took Len to the Art Institute and we wanted to look at White Crucifixion. And afterwards, we were invited to go by one of the conservators into the conservatory where she was working on a painting by Chagall. And she said something or other. And Len said, "But that's not what Chagall said to me." And she looked at him in utter amazement and said, "You met Chagall?" Of course he said. What an incredible man. And Marion too. And I think people aren't really aware of Marion's contributions to the city of Chicago. I mean, she founded what is now the Architecture Center, was originally the Architecture Foundation. It was originally to save the Glessner House, but then of course it evolved into a much, much bigger project. So she is very deserving of equal acknowledgement. Bob, you must be so proud of your parents.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Caroline, I would like you to at least, years ago, you told me the story of when Len was quite old and you were sitting by his side and reading to him. And tell me some of the things you read to him that he wanted to hear.
Oh, right. I'd forgotten that.
He was interpreting Browning.
We read the classics. I can't remember now.
Yes,
You know, Virgil's Aeneid or something like that.
that was one of them. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, one story I remember Caroline told was that a day or two before he died, she was sitting with him and he was giving her interpretation of Robert Browning's poetry. That's one story I remember, but it may not be accurate. But you remember that, Caroline?
Well, I mean, he was just so on top of everything. Whenever I went to see him, there'd be books on the dining room table that he was reading, and he was just incredible. I feel so deeply, deeply privileged to have known him and loved him and been loved by him. Right, and Marion.
So Kenan, can I ask you to expand a little bit more on your working relationship with Leon while you were writing together, challenging the Daily Machine, and later your afternoons with him?
Well, first of all, let me say that my connection with him went back to 1963 when I first became a reporter at the Chicago's American.
And it's hard to hear you.
Okay, my first acquaintance with Len and with Ab Mikva and some of the others was in 1963 when I became Jack Mabley's leg man, and I had no experience as a reporter in journalism at all. I had, except for a small labor paper in Detroit. And Jack asked me the question. I said, "Are you a conservative or a liberal or what?" And I said, if I don't know much about a situation, I tend to be conservative. If I know the facts, I tend to be a liberal. If I know the whole situation, I can be a radical. And he hired me, you know. and we had quite an experience. These guys would occasionally set up some project for me to go. For example, I went downstate after the tremendous attack on Daley's cheating on the voting legislation, voting in, I think, the '64 election, and so I went down to a small little town somewhere. Nobody even came near cheating. There was no Daley in that town, but anyhow, it was an interesting little trip. But then we had an acquaintance back sometime from, you know, and occasionally, and I had an admiration for him. And when I retired, I wanted to do something interesting. I had more interesting, and I had written a number of books and things like that. And so I got the idea that, and I called up Len and told him, you know, let's do it. And he said, let's do it. And we did it. And we had a lot of meetings. I spent a lot of time with him. I attended a meeting at with the Park Society or whatever it was that he was very active with and been honored by for his work. And we went out and visited those parks that you know, and looked at them. We also went to the library where his father had been on the board of the Chicago Public Library, and we had some suggestions for him. Wherever we went, we got some ideas. We met people in different places, and we got involved with things that we tried to do something. That we went to a place in north of Hyde Park where they had done a lot of rebuilding and things like this, and I found out that they were very little for people who were really poor would move into that, although they had torn down the buildings for it. And you know, again, it gave the book a chance for him to speak out on this subject. And you know, that it was such a liberal idea to put people of different groups in there, but the number of very poor people were a thing. And both he and I were we're deeply concerned about that aspect of it. And we just did a lot of things and went a lot of places that were meaningful. And the book tells that better than I'm telling it verbally right now. So, and by the way, I don't get any royalties on any of these books. So let me encourage you to buy them. And it doesn't matter to me from a financial standpoint. I don't get a nickel out of them, and I haven't for years and years and years. So anyhow, I urge you to, if you don't have a copy, get a copy for your group and pass it around. You don't have to buy it even. So any other questions?
I haven't got a question, but
Hi, Caroline, I love you. Take care.
Oh, thank you. I would like to continue pursuing my project, which is to get a small, modest, but nevertheless a memorial to Len at the Clarence Darrow Bridge in Hyde.
Amen. Yes.
That was suspended when the COVID stuff sucked us.
Well, I hope they have it again because I always tried to attend.
Right. So would you join me, Kenan?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else join me? No?
Yes.
Well, Caroline,
Can I say something about that?
Right.
Caroline, this is Nina Helstein.
Where are you?
I don't know, here.
Oh, there, I see you. Right.
Okay. I just want to tell you, I don't know if you know, I'm on the committee. Len asked me to join the committee for the Darrow event.
Uh-huh.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story about that. But there has been talk about exactly your suggestion, and we can talk about it. I know other people who would like to work on it. Okay.
Can you share my email with Nina, please? Hyde Park Historical Society.
sure,
Thank
we
you.
can do that.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes. As a matter of fact, the Hyde Park Historical Society has pre-COVID, again, when you were initially talking about this memorial, we discussed it in our meeting one night, and we were invited to be partners in this event, which we would be delighted to do. But of course, COVID kind of shut everything down. So Bob, if you remember, we simply asked your committee to come back to us with a proposal about what you intended to do, and we would be happy to review it and join on board. So certainly, Caroline, that is something that is very much in our radar, although it has been delayed. And I think part of the reason was the Darrow Bridge repairs has been a problem. And just everything going on in Jackson Park has been something of an issue. So certainly we would welcome reopening this discussion with the Historical Society Board. And anything you can send us at the Historical Society, and we would be glad to distribute it to anybody on our mailing list, which is now, by the way, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, up to about 1,700 people. Wow. So yeah, we'll be happy to.
What is
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
I would like to suggest you consider having my wife give a talk there. She is a nurse and she's a lawyer, and she represented people on death row for 21 years. And not only that, she was the one person when they had a big hearing, when they ended the death penalty here, who got up and spoke on behalf of the clients, but also addressed the families and said, we care about you. We care what happened to you. And that's the kind of person she is. And that's how she did it when she represented more than 50 people on death row.
Wow.
And she wrote a chapter in this book on Clarence Darrow, on capital punishment.
So I want to tell you a story about Len. Every year we would meet.
Get the address.
Pardon me?
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Nina.
Every year we would meet and talk about what topic would we take up for this year. When we would come into the museum and have a program. And every year somebody would very seriously say, so what topic should it be this year? And every year Len would say, abolish the death penalty. That was his topic every time. It was quite wonderful.
To see if anybody's on there. Well.
Talking about death penalty, I remember when I was a child at school in England in the 50s and up to 1960. My school was only about half a mile away from the city jail, which was right in the middle of town in Bedford.
Yeah.
And in those days, there were still executions for murder. And every time we knew there was a hanging, it was usually at 8 o'clock in the morning, there'd be absolute silence in where we were having breakfast as we thought about it. I mean, God, that was in my lifetime. I think it was only abolished in England in 1976.
Michael, I can't see my picture here. I can see that I'm talking, but I don't know where I am visually.
I can see you.
I see you.
Yeah, you're in the upper right-hand corner, Bob. At least on my screen.
Mine too.
Okay.
And I can see Louise.
Jean Jenkins. Whenever I'm on a Zoom meeting, I'm always on the top row, second from the left, with the host on the left. And so maybe, Bob, you're there because you're looking at your screen.
Oh, right.
Well, I guess as long as you can see me, I guess that's the important thing more than seeing myself.
And we can hear you.
I guess that's kind of a vanity. It's kind of a vanity. But anyway, I had a couple of stories about my father, to just kind of I know in the statues, there was a lot of discussion with a sculptor on the north side. His name I can't remember. Richard something. He was
Richard Hunt.
Richard what?
Richard Hunt, probably.
Richard Hunt. But I remember a couple of stories. My father, one thing he talked about the 2016 Olympics. There was a time that Chicago was contending for the 2016 Olympics. He said that if Chicago gets it, he'll boycott the Olympics. I also remember that in my case and in other people's cases, my father always listened very, very attentively to people. He was very, he was focused on them as if they're the most important person. He talked about age 99 of doing something special once a day. When he was in his 90s and going to the rehab center on the north side, he tried to learn computers at that point. He hadn't. But some of the things that I remember about him, which were, was when I was a kid, we took a lot of bike rides around the city, and I really got to know the city very well. We went to all kinds of restaurants. We went to we went to a big concrete. I forget, it was Chinatown. We went up to grandfather's cemetery, Sam Despres, when he was on the Chicago Library Board. But biking around the city was a lot of fun. I got a great education about the city and about the urban values and about what a city was really all about. We just enjoyed them a lot. He really communicated to me his interests, and that's why I think I probably got my parents' involvement in urban renewal. That I really become focused on social action and on social advocacy. Yeah, I remember one time in the art museum, he gave me pencil and paper and asked me to try and copy some of the art. It was just ridiculous. Some of the lines were really yeah. There was also a story about when he was about in his upper 90s. He gave a speech at the Historical Society at the Chicago Historical Museum about how the Indians were gypped out of Chicago, how the French got them drunk and made them sign a document, which they had made them sign a document under the influence. But I don't know whether that was at the Haymarket or where it was, because a lot of you probably know a lot more about the stuff in City Council. I certainly heard about it.
Backstage with King.
He just generally enriched my life, very much. We spent a lot of time together. At first when he was thinking about running for alderman, I was a little upset because that would mean more time away from home. That means I would have less time, but he would. But no, obviously, it was a very great thing. I was very proud of him. Very proud of him for what he did.
One of the things I remember very much about Len and Marion was how they kept fit. They both swam every day.
Yes.
And Len would, until his 90s, was bicycling to work. And then when he got to town, he would go and swim, I think, at the Chicago Athletic Club.
Yeah. He bicycled into his 70s, and he was having a little problem with balance. So right. my mom made him stop.
And that's when I used to ride into town on the bus with him.
And then until his 90s, he was swam at the athletic club. And he swam down there with our son Fred. Fred used to spend, I guess, a week or two during the summer with my parents, and he really had a great time with them. I mean, my wife and I wanted to take a vacation, but he enjoyed going to the museums. He went to the Despres Museum. He was, he dug a lot of in there. They kind of fake archaeological dig. He also did some tutoring one of the projects from the JCUA. Got him a couple of days of tutoring. I guess my dad was able to arrange it. At Cabrini Green, and this experience Fred never forgot, and I was very grateful to folks for learning that. And they took him to Colorado once, and I was very grateful for that. But anyway, that's about all for right now. If you have any questions, or it's kind of a random.
Right. Thank you Thank you, Bob. And we've got a couple of questions coming in, but I wanted to share a few things. I was privileged to, through Caroline, get a transcript of what Tom Geoghegan more or less said about Len at his memorial service. And I want to share a few of those comments with you because I think they're very interesting. One of his points was, what kind of a lawyer was Leon Despres? And his answer was, he was a civil rights lawyer before there was the term. And he was a civil liberties lawyer almost as his whole profession when he was counsel for the Illinois ACLU. He was a labor lawyer. When I joined, his whole litigation practice was about labor practice. And the labor practice was very close to a civil rights practice, since a lot of his labor clients were African-American in unions like the Red Caps, where he took a case to the Supreme Court. He was a lawyer who pushed women's rights. He really fought to make nursing a real profession as counsel for the Illinois Nurses Association, and it was his cause to free nurses from their subservience and to establish them as professionals. And he was involved in cases to protect the lakefront. He was an environmental lawyer before we had the term. Even his transactional work in real estate was a form of public interest. He represented co-ops and was part of the co-op movement, which had started in New York City. He was an authority on condos and co-ops back when people hardly knew what condos were. So that is just a little bit. Tom had planned to be with us tonight. Unfortunately, he had a professional conflict, so he could not. But I thought that that particular excerpt from his reminiscences about Len was particularly interesting. And now we have some questions in the chat from Mary. Sorry, Caroline?
Entering here. Gosh, now I've forgotten what I wanted to say. It'll come back to me. Right.
Okay, let me just say something. The person who really inspired him, and this came up many times in our conversation, was a rabbi in the early 1920s.
Yes.
Who really took him under his wing and talked to him about social justice and issues like this. It didn't just spring out in him. It grew from a seed that someone else planted.
Rabbi,
I remember what I wanted to say.
Rabbi, excuse me.
I think, does anybody still have Obama's comments from Len's memorial? As I recall, Obama said he was one of his greatest inspirations.
Yeah.
From his memorial.
Yeah.
Obama sent a letter.
Right. What did he say, Bob?
I don't remember. But
well, as I recall, he said that Len was one of his greatest inspirations.
Bob, do you know the name of that rabbi that I was talking about?
Yeah, his name was Rabbi Emil Hirsch.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And I know all about Emil Hirsch.
Yeah. After my dad's father died when he was about 11, and my father went to Sinai. He after he was 11, he said, Rabbi Hirsch sort of became kind of a father figure to him. And Emil Hirsch was one of the outstanding Reform rabbis in Chicago
in all time. The whole history of Chicago.
Yeah,
possibly the most outstanding.
Rabbi Hirsch was nationally known for his work. So.
Well,
all right, I want to.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about Kennan's book, Sunday afternoons with Len. And because Len really enjoyed those trips with Kennan around the city. And I remember that Kennan thought of all kinds of places, to take Len. And one of them was he took Len to Meigs Field when it was being
after it was,
after it was not Meigs Field. Yeah. And Len was quite interested and impressed by what was being done there. And he really looked forward to those trips.
Well, I love to hear that. Because it was something I gave back to him, and I wanted to do it. And, and
it's very nice.
Today I know much more about him than I did then, because now I'm retired. My accomplishments are way in my past, and a few of them still around a little bit, but it's I can understand somebody doing that, and and appreciate that I helped him do it.
Yeah. Well, I guess Ben Johnson.
I have a question.
Yes, I met, I was at Roosevelt College, and my teacher, one of my teachers there was Mrs. Despres. And I got to meet Leon through the Democratic Federation of Illinois, which was formed in, can't remember when, but we at Roosevelt with me was Harold Washington and Gus Savage and several other people, and we formed a group called the Chicago League of Negro Voters in order to challenge the Daley machine. And we ran our first candidate the first Black candidate for a citywide office named Lemuel Bentley in 1959, and ran several other candidates for aldermen throughout the city. And we endorsed Leon in the Fifth Ward, and he was running against a guy named Chauncey Estridge, who was a very popular Black lawyer, very successful Black lawyer. And Leon always gave us credit for re-electing him in that election. And I, of course, had a relationship after that politically, but he was a very extraordinary person, and he deserves much more credit and much more recognition than he received from our city. And
I want to follow up on that comment. When he was in the city council, one of the white aldermen, because he was always talking about getting somebody who's African American on the city council, or who was not tied to the footstrings of Mayor Daley in his pocket, or on women. And somebody said, why don't you retire and let a Black woman become the alderman of the Fifth Ward?
Yeah.
Well, and somebody said he was the only Negro in the city council.
Yeah, he really was. I mean, the other people, see, what happened was Daley did not give them any important positions, but he did give them the things that he gave other aldermen, their jobs out there and stuff like that, so that he could get their votes and their votes of their people. But he never gave one a top job. He made that sure. Because he was a friggin' bigot.
Yeah.
But
All right.
when Leon died, Mayor Daley's son sent a very long note and proclamation, and he was very, very generous about what he said about Leon, considering, the relationship with his father. I thought it was remarkable.
Okay, we have a couple of questions on chat. One is from Mary Armstrong. She asked, Ken or Robert, could you expand a bit on chapter 14 with what Martin Luther King ended up getting some kind of victory or imagined victory?
Well,
all right, I have an answer to that question. What happened was when Martin Luther King came to Chicago, he had a meeting before he left. He didn't accomplish much in Chicago. It was not a success here. You know, I personally had been on the March on Washington and I covered 10 speeches he gave in the Chicago area, but he just, you know, and Len tried to convince him that to change the situation in Chicago, you had to change the politics, that it was a political problem in Chicago that was causing the race problem to a large extent. And Martin Luther King never accepted that fact. And he held a meeting at the end of all the people, top people he had worked with in the city, and Len was the only white person there. And again, Len made that plea to him, you know, hit it on politics. And nothing really happened, unfortunately. And I speak
Let me comment on that.
Martin Luther King, but you know, he was not into Chicago.
Let me comment on that because one of the key guys with King was a fellow named Bernard Lee that when I say we, our group was responsible for sending him down there. He wanted to meet King. The point is that he sent Doc King sent Bernard to Chicago to meet with Harold, to meet with us, I guess you say, in order to find out if Harold could get the black aldermen not to push back against King coming to Chicago. And of course, we couldn't do that because Dawson and Daley controlled them. But the other important part of it is that in 1959, we drove down to Memphis after King came back from India and tried to get him involved in politics, in independent black politics. And we were successful in getting the local Memphis politicians involved, and they fought against Boss Crump. But King did not really want to get into politics at that time, and that was one of his shortcomings.
Okay, we have another question from Judy for either Kenan or Robert. Your book describes Mr. Despres' focus on the future, a wonderful roadmap for the world, existentially, not just Chicago. What would Mr. Despres advise of the current political situation, given the GOP, voter suppression, Trumpism? In some sense, the circumstances are very similar to, but also very different from the politics of his day.
That's a tough question. I'm sure he would be, violently, obviously violently against it. There's a story that when Barry Goldwater was running for president, my dad said if Goldwater is elected, he'll move to Canada. So I think of my father's response to Trump being elected probably would have been the same. But I can see him organizing. I can see visualizing some organizing in Chicago. I'm really not sure the divisive. The divisive matter, just trying to bring people together. I'm really not sure exactly what he would, those kinds of things.
I can't think of any two people that are more opposite than this guy by the name of Trump and Despres.
It's true.
I mean, he needed a rabbi in his early life, and he didn't get one.
Well, Bob and I have sometimes mentioned that we're sorry our parents didn't live to hear, and then you fill in the blank. But with the political situation, we we said that we're glad our parents didn't have to know how things were going to turn out. Because really the world has changed quite a bit. And unfortunately, I don't think it's quite in the way that our two fathers would have wished.
If I can just throw in a little personal thing here. I came to Chicago. I'd been a student in the late 50s and then was gone for a while and then married somebody who had been from the OC and came back to Chicago in early 70s. And I'm an unpolitical person. I see something I think needs to be done and I get involved in doing it, but not through political organizations because I tried it a couple of times and I thought those people are, just involved in their own interests.
Chicago!
And so, that everywhere, but Chicago was worse. Anyway, I heard about Len living in Hyde Park, especially. And what I heard was that he would stand up and speak at the meetings of the council, and he would just have his microphones turned off. So I, thought, well, good for him. And he just kept doing it. And I must say that knowing that he did that gave me the strength to stand up against Daley when I got involved in trying to save the cultural center from being torn down and, other projects that I would just get involved in on a project basis. And I'm sorry that I was not aware of Len and Marion's interest in architecture at the time, where I would have, connected with them, but I had just come back from outside. And so I sort of stumbled along on my own on that. But what gave me strength to continue pounding away at it was that I would remember Len and he would just be told to shut up and sit down and his microphone would be turned off. But he got things done. And so that gave me strength to keep trying.
One of the things that he got done that was extraordinarily significant was the lead paint poisoning in the very homes of the very poor of Chicago. That back when they painted these walls, they used lead paint, and that gave children a lot of afflictions. As a matter of fact, we had a neighbor down the street whose children were affected that way, and we had a 2-flat, so we moved them into it. When we moved out, we kept the 2-flat and let them live in it, and we got a Section 8 housing project, so we got our money back in the long run through the federal government, and they were able to live there, but it was a real problem. His law got passed. It didn't get passed right away, but eventually even the city council of Chicago acknowledged that it was necessary. And he wasn't given credit for it, but he was the guy. He was the guy who fought the thing all the way through.
If I could just make a point, maybe following up on that as an observer of the wonderful Len Despres, his courage at standing up almost always alone against the forces of the Chicago machine was always so admirable. I mean, this was not an easy thing to do, and I'm not sure people today would understand what courage it probably took to do that. And I just admired him so greatly.
Well, I'd like to share another few words from Tom Geoghegan's notes. He was talking about 3 things that he learned from Leon Despres. And the first one was he never gave up on a client. He kept pressing. I was the one who was always first to push settlement. Len, let's settle, let's settle. He'd be very civilized, but he would keep pushing, pushing, pushing. It could be saving WFMT. It could be representing a woman in a fraternity suit. So respectable people would say in the big corporate firms, oh, Leon Despres, such a gentleman, if we could just deal with him alone without his young, ill-tempered associate who's manipulating this decent old gentleman. Okay. Second, he taught me to hate pomposity. My God, how he hated pompous legal writing and tried to simplify, simplify, simplify. He taught me as a form of argument to be simple, direct, and above all, not pompous. Third, he tried his best to get me to pay attention to people, to really listen to our clients and treat them with as much dignity as our best paying clients. He was much quicker than I. He could do numbers in his head, but he took an hour and a half where I'd take an hour to get the facts out of a client. So those are some of Tom Geoghegan's words about Len.
I see a nod of the head by his daughter.
Yeah, I saw Carol V's question about Winnetka. There was an item in the, I did two things, a couple of things I wanted to say. It was mentioned in the book that he had some thoughts about moving to Winnetka, either for reasons of our going to school or whether it would be a better place to bring us up or something. But he said he once went to a picnic, and once went to a picnic out there, and he met a bunch of people who went to lawyers who we thought were just terrible, which focused, which deterred him from moving to Winnetka. My mother had been born and grew up in Winnetka, and her family, the Alsler family, had lived in Winnetka. The other thing, that was just for a summer that we lived in Winnetka. The other thing, I was about 3 years old, which affected them. One time in the house, I was up on the second floor. I was supposed to be taking a nap, and my mother was downstairs doing something, ironing or fixing something. And I went over, I got out of the crib and went over to the window, and I pushed out the screen and pounded my head on the sidewalk, in which I suffered a concussion and a fracture. But I don't remember anything about that specifically. But I was about 3 years old, but that's always been a great part of my life. So I was in the hospital about 6 weeks for that. But, I remember being in a crib, but that was really the experience in Chicago, in Winnetka. We were just there for a summer. That's the story. That's what I know about that.
All right, does anybody have any other comments they want to make tonight? I mean, this is...
It's so good to see Nina. Oh, she's disappeared.
Oh.
Sorry.
You're muted.
I think...
I just want to say...
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I have something I could add. I moved to the Pioneer Co-op when I was 23 years old, and I'm about to be 78, and I've lived here most of the time. And Len was one of the founders of this co-op, and he was our lawyer for all the years that he could be, for a very long time. And he would come to, we had potluck dinners, and he would come to those, and he came and did a funeral, really, of one of the other founders. We just put chairs up in the yard, and he came and He was part of this place. I have a feeling there are many places he was part of, but it was very, very wonderful, the role he took with us. I was president of the co-op on and off for lots of years, and I've kept all the letters he wrote about situations because they're so useful. Even now, I pull out these letters and look at them because they're instructive.
I wish we had put that in the book.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Are you related to Ralph Hellstein?
What?
Are you related to Ralph Hellstein?
Did you? That's my dad.
Oh, okay.
How did you know? How did you know him?
Through my first wife used to work at the packing house, at the headquarters on Dearborn. But I work with the packing house. Richard Durham, Herman Gilbert, Franklin Brown all worked at the headquarters.
Nice to meet you.
My pleasure.
So good to see you, Nina.
It's good to see all these people here. It's really,
yes, it is.
I'm glad whoever had this idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Nina, just to segue a little bit from your comment about the Pioneer Co-op, which is an amazing building, I would just like to say a couple of words about Len Despres and the Hyde Park Cooperative Society, the long lamented grocery store for which he was an original founder in 1935 and was a lawyer for until the time of its demise in 2000, I think it was 2007, 8, something like that. Just a year or two before he died. One of the most amazing memories I have.
2009.
Yes, and one of the most amazing memories I have is when the Hyde Park Co-op closed and we held a New Orleans style funeral for the co-op. We had musicians walk, we had, for one thing, Len was there in his wheelchair. I mean, he was quite old at the time. He had founded this organization and had watched it fold. It was a very sad moment, but we celebrated its existence. And I can remember the circle around Len in the grocery store as we bid farewell to the co-op and did a New Orleans style funeral up and down the aisles with the trumpets and the musicians and all that. But that was an amazing memory of Len. So yes. So, okay. I'm getting a little teary-eyed now. Does anybody have any other comments?
I'm grateful to all of you for telling me a lot about my dad. Some things I did, a lot of things I didn't know about. And it was just wonderful to see all of you and to hear about all these things. And,
he was a great, great man. Privileged.
He was.
Michael, I would like to add a newcomer's point of view. I didn't know anything about how great Len Despres was, but I sure did enjoy the way that he treated a newcomer at that closing of the co-op. I had been involved in a co-op in New York and a co-op in Lansing, Michigan. And so, of course, when I moved to Hyde Park, I just expected to be part of the co-op here. And they wouldn't take my money because they knew what they were going to do. And that was in 2007. But that day, yes, in his wheelchair, yes, with everyone around him, after it was all over, we had about a 20-minute conversation just about expectations and how things can change from what we've been expecting in our lives, such as the co-op, and but also that how wonderful it is when people work together. That I'll never forget that conversation. I had no idea. I knew he was special because he was being celebrated that day, but I had no idea. I was maybe 3 months in the community at that point. and it was a fantastic undertaking, but also for people to realize that you didn't have to know him for him to be wonderful in responding to you.
Yes, he was.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny.
He was so accessible
Yes.
to everyone. I think we all knew that and loved that about him. All right, do we have any other comments? We're getting close to all of our, yes?
I'd like to make one quick one. I met Len when he was at least 100 years old. And he didn't know me, but I was pretty new with Michael on the working on archives, but in this case, the Oral History Committee. And of course, Bob has served on that committee, Bob Despres. So one of the things we needed to do was raise some money to take care of that. And so I applied for a grant and needed some letters of support. And so I called up Len and he said, of course I'll support it. And I went to his apartment and met him, and he was very gracious, and he signed a letter of support, which helped us get the Hyde Park Society, Hyde Park Historical Society Oral History Project going. And of course we got the grant, and his support meant a lot to people in the community and to the foundation to which we applied, because not only was he well known, but he was, as everybody says, a really fine gentleman, and he was known to the entire community and to the city of Chicago. So I was very grateful to him for that support, not too long before he passed away.
I'd like to end with a quote from Mike Royko, which I didn't read earlier.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
All right, I want to end with a quotation from Mike Royko's introduction to the book. He said, being in the forefront, he, Len Despres, is usually the first to be hit on the head with the mayor's gavel. Some of my enjoyable afternoons have been spent listening to the rhythmic beat of the gavel and head with Claude Holman singing an aria. So,
and what's ironic is that Holman teamed up with Leon Despres to pass an open housing ordinance early on in the 40s, late 40s.
Yeah.
All right, well, I would like to thank everybody, especially Ken, Bob, and Caroline, for participating in this book club meeting, which has become so much bigger than just a book club meeting. But that's kind of what we try to do here, is put the historical context and the personal context into what we're reading. So I thank you all for participating. I would just like to take a brief moment to let you know what we've got coming up. On June 21st, we have Maria Hinojosa, who grew up in Hyde Park and attended lab school. She's recently written a book called Once I Was You, a memoir of love and hate in a torn America. She is an Emmy award-winning author. She has done shows on PBS. She's just an amazing individual, and her story about growing up in Hyde Park is fascinating. On Monday, July 19th, we're going to be exploring the world of Hyde Parker Lisa Fitco and her book, Escape Through the Pyrenees. Lisa was in the underground during World War II. Fascinating story. And moved to Hyde Park later in life and became a friend with longtime Hyde Parker Freeney Ness, who has narrated a biography of Lisa. So we'll be featuring that. And finally, on Monday, September 20th, 2021, we're going to be taking a look at the book Believer, My 40 Years in Politics by David Axelrod. And leading that discussion will be Dr. Ray Lodato from the University of Chicago. So we've got a lot of interesting things coming up, and a shameless plug for a Historical Society program coming up, The History of Hyde Park's Grand Hotels with Patricia Morse, Sunday, July 18th from 2 to 4 p.m., Zoom registration. I'm sure a lot of you know what a fascinating story of hotels there are in Hyde Park, especially around the World Columbian Exposition, but even later. So a lot of interesting things coming up. We'll keep you all informed about that. And I thank you all for coming tonight. And
Kathy Huff has something to say.
Yeah, there's one more event. Everybody was sent save the date. I sent a flyer to Janice Knox to send out this week. And upcoming this month at 7 o'clock, May 27th, which is a Thursday evening, the Hyde Park Historical Society Oral History Committee is joining with the Hyde Park Chamber of Commerce with a storytelling event that we've recorded some business people from Hyde Park. And the storytelling event is to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Hyde Park Chamber of Commerce. So participants will be able to tell their own stories, just as some of you all have told your story. And these will be about Hyde Park businesses and the Hyde Park Chamber of Commerce. And then we have 5 or 6 videos that we've already interviews of 5 or 6 longtime business people in Hyde Park. They're about 3 to 5 minutes each. They will be shown during this program. So it's going to be a very interesting historical thing. And I'm sorry, Michael, that we didn't have things out sooner, but as you know, we're working with a partner and they have multiple things going on. So everybody will probably get that flyer in a day or two.
Is that going to be on? Is that going to be online?
Many thanks to Michael. Many thanks to Kenan. And great to see you, Bob and Louise.
Amen.
Yes.
Bye. And
Great
bye.
to see you,
Thanks again. This was really
Michael.
fun to do.
Thank you very much.
thank you, everybody. Thank you. And good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you for
Good night.
joining us.
Everything will be online, Bob. It'll be online.